I hadn't intended to go totally in this direction on this program, but as long as we're talking and you have the experience on it, I live in Clarence,
Right.
and I'll use that as an example.
Sure.
The Clarence, when I moved into Clarence, it was relatively rural. There was a lot of farmland, and there was some development. And I'll use Amherst as a comparison to Clarence. Amherst in the 60s started out almost like Clarence is today. It was kind of rural, there was a lot of farmland, and it started to grow in leaps and bounds. Everybody wanted to go to Clarence and Williamsville and look at what Clarence and Williamsville is, Amherst and Williamsville today. It's elbow to elbow, and taxes are very high. And I don't know about services and how people deal with it, whether they're happy with their tax assessments or whatever. But Clarence residents typically don't want it to turn into Amherst. They want to preserve that country feel. And yet there's a lot of development that's going on in Clarence. Why would the town government, and this could be West Seneca or Orchard Park or any of the small towns in the area, but specifically Clarence, why would they allow a lot of development to take over the countryside and turn it into something other than the rural experience that gives Clarence the character? It's not going to lower taxes, because the more people and the more infrastructure, the more services that are required, and basically it gets more expensive, not less.
So I went to a good question, and the answer is money, as it usually is in anything you talk about. I went to a seminar a couple years ago, and there was this guy talking about urban sprawl. And he said one of the problems with municipalities that you have is that every time you put a development in, it costs the municipality money. And the more developments you put in, the tougher it is for municipalities to make their nut. So I listened to it and I thought, I wonder if it's true. I have a questioning mind. So I went back and I called the highway superintendent, and I took one of the developments in Clarence, and I looked at that development over 20 years. Then I talked the highway superintendent, and I said, what would it cost us to pave that over 20 years? Because that's mainly your cost to the town. And he gave me the numbers, and I compared them. And what this professor had been saying was 100% wrong. And one of the things I saw is that developments are huge generators of revenue for a town, and that's how you keep your base down, is by building more and more developments. So this especially when you get to academia, this idea of urban sprawl costs the towns lose money every time you build development. Exactly the opposite. The paving of roads is a multiplier by just a phenomenal difference of the tax revenue that comes in versus the maintenance of those roads. And when I was on the ECIDA and the town of Clarence supervisor, and also head of the development IDA, one of the things I saw is that not only was there a hunger in Clarence and Amherst, but if you go to the towns in the southern tier, even getting down to Boston and Elma, one of the things they love is developments to come in, and hotels and businesses. They want more. People don't want to go down there, but they would love to have as much development as possible, because that's tax revenue for the town. And the only way the town's going to generate revenue is either through developments, residential, or industrial. Industrial, really hard to get in. Who wants to open a factory in Elma? But residential, there's a possibility because it's rural. But the only way and the other way that is the town is to cut bodies, which is always difficult. But so you have to raise revenue or cut. Most towns would rather have a beautiful new development come in than having to cut, obviously, people off the payroll. But the bottom line is it's huge dollars when you build a development, especially in a town like Clarence.
So you're saying that when you have a more population and more developments, it will actually lower the cost for the residents as opposed to raising taxes eventually?
It will, but you need to be careful. For example, there are things towns can do to keep their costs down really low. One is no police department. The other is no garbage. And if you look at a town like Cheektowaga, they have both, which is why their taxes are so high. The other thing the towns need to do is, in addition to encouraging industrial development and residential development, is embrace new technology to drop the cost of actually running the town. And with those three things, the town can run pretty efficiently.
Okay, that's interesting. Typically in the history of government in this country and pretty much everywhere, taxes tend to go up, and things tend to grow, and there's a big debate as to whether or not it's a revenue problem or a spending problem when it comes to the economy of government. And so we touched on it a little bit earlier. Government doesn't spend their own money. They spend the people's money.
Right.
And the incentive to be efficient and the incentive to be responsible doesn't necessarily translate when you're spending somebody else's money.
Right.
Isn't that a problem?
Oh, it's a huge problem, which is why municipalities aren't efficient. And I'm not only talking about little municipalities, but I'm talking about the state of New York and Erie County, not efficient at all, because it's easy to spend someone else's money, but it's hard when it's your own money. So yeah, so the double bind of having difficulty raising revenue, and the people you're tasking with raising that revenue there's exactly no interest in those people to raise revenue. So what comes around, what happens is that costs keep going up and nobody cuts, and that's the problem with municipalities. Problem with the state of New York. State of New York, Cuomo, who I love for his tax cap, keeps going to the federal government saying we need more money. Well, no, what you need to do is cut your costs. Mm-hmm. That's what we need to start, but they will never do that, because it's just easier to raise taxes and throw those unfunded mandates on the either on the taxpayers or on the backs of the people in the town that keep forcing them down,
Now, why is New York so different than any other state, other than maybe California, in terms of the spending, the regulations, and so on? Is it because it's a one-party state primarily, or is there just a culture of bureaucracy that grows and grows and grows? Is it out of control? Or does New York actually do a good job under the circumstances?
I think it's a combination of all three. First of all, one-party rule, which is never good. I mean, in the United States, when you have two parties, there's this organized kind of debate back and forth, and you hash over the issues. Not so in New York. Obviously, we know one party. Two, New York is incredibly generous, which if you need something for free, New York's a great place to be, whether you're talking about all the social service programs or business programs, or huge business programs like Riverbend, where New York's willing to donate hundreds of millions of dollars for a new business to come in. New York incredibly generous, but somebody has to pay for that generosity, and it winds up on the back of the taxpayers. So if you're of the progressive mindset, it doesn't matter. Obama, you didn't build this road. The government built that road. It's nice to have the government provide free things for you, as long as you don't have to pay for it. But if you want to pay for it, you want to be in a state like Texas or Utah, where taxes are much lower, and they're not quite as generous. I think there's a balance between the two. New York, I think, is overly generous. I think if you go to some states downtown, Alabama, Mississippi, not generous at all. There's definitely a mindset. But I love New York, so the fact they're generous, I'd love them to cut, but it's not going to happen, not with a one-party rule.
Well, as my old pappy used to say, puts one word into perspective, and that is the word free.
Right.
Okay? People say, well, this is free and that's free. You're going to get this for free. You're going to get that for... Nothing in this life is free, right? I mean, somebody always pays for whatever.
Right, yeah.
So when people hear that something's for free, they are always, every time, should take that with a grain of salt, right?
Right, absolutely. And the exodus from New York, people try to vote, but your vote, if you're not in the dominant party, really has no effect. But people in New York do vote, and they vote with their feet, which is why there's been a huge exodus from people from the state of New York to states like Florida, states like Texas, states like North Carolina that have lower taxes. So people vote with their feet. It's sad, but it is what it is.
In a situation like this, when you raise taxes and regulations, for that matter, and then people get tired of it and move out of state, that means that those people aren't contributing.
Right.
So you're getting less revenue. Then it's almost counterintuitive, but you're going to have to raise taxes again to make up for the people who've left. And more people get tired of that cycle of more taxes, and they're going to leave. Where does it end? Or can it end?
Where it should end is that people in the state should get fed up with their high taxes and vote out the politicians in office. We know how that works in New York. Hasn't happened yet, has it?
Yeah, it hasn't happened.
No, it hasn't happened. So
I'm
that's
not
ultimately
real optimistic about that possibility.
Nor am I. But you're exactly right. That's exactly what happens. People vote with their feet. They go to North Carolina, and taxes keep going up. So,
under the circumstances, There's so much we can talk about, and as usual, this time goes so quickly. We're going to have you back and talk more about this as the situation with COVID-19 progresses, and as we continue on with the economy, see where it goes. That's all the time we have for this big picture. I want to thank David Hartzell for being my guest. If you have any questions about your investments or the economy, and you need a good financial advisor, David Hartzell with Cornell Capital. We'll put his information up on the screen. I want to thank you for watching The Big Picture. Thank you, as always, for watching WBBZ-TV, and we will catch you next time on The Big Picture. Thanks again.